but it had a lot to do with it. And it isn't because it was a car town. Torino, Italy is a car town that lost almost all of its manufacturing, car manufacturing. It's a beautiful city and it's reinvented itself. And they still have the streetcars and all the other stuff. They didn't lacerate the city with highways. And it's a great city. Detroit sits in ruins. That's Detroit. It looks like World War II happened in Detroit, not in Stalingrad or Dresden or Berlin. And the effect in New Orleans. This is Claiborne Boulevard in 1947. Louis Armstrong lived there. That was the African-American Creole upper middle class street. On Sunday after church, people would stroll up and down the boulevard with 2,000 live oaks in what they call the neutral ground, or the median. They started tearing those down in 1966. They were gone. 247 businesses along the street. Now there's about 29. There it is. You know, it reduced the value of the whole neighborhood. That's Treme, where the TV show is filmed. Now the Treme neighborhood is pretty well united in wanting to put it back the way it was. This is St. Bernard Circle, where St. Bernard Avenue and Claiborne came together. It was one of the center pieces of New Orleans, and then it was covered with a freeway. We want to put it back the way it was. And this is in Barcelona, just to show you how beautiful a transit line can be, if it's done right. But anyway, there's great opportunity now. The infrastructure, particularly anything elevated, has a life of about 40 years. And so we're rethinking infrastructure. There's no money, they're out of money, so it's a good time to rethink. And so the West Side Highway in New York, which fell down in 1975, was replaced with an ordinary 6-lane street, but it opened up the views of the Hudson, and the real estate market came back to life. And the buildings, many of which were crumbling, including the place where John Erickson lived in Tribeca, but now it's all rebuilt and beautiful and high-priced, and you have to worry about gentrification, which is not the worst problem you have to worry about. The gentrification is often brought as an issue in cities that don't have anything. Like, we had a developer trying to do something on Jefferson Street in Detroit, and Acorn, I don't hate Acorn like some people do, but Acorn came along and protested and said it would gentrify the east side of Detroit. Gentrification is not much of a threat to Detroit, and they should be so lucky. And the same thing with the freeway in San Francisco, Market Street at the ferry. It's all now back. The Embarcadero is beautiful. There's several thousand units of housing, including affordable housing, that's been built along the route. And in Milwaukee, without an earthquake, we tore down the freeway, and Manpower moved their headquarters to downtown. There's 5,000 more units of housing as of 2003, and now it's about 7,000 units of housing in the downtown, doubling the amount of housing in the downtown. And one of the things that we did in Milwaukee to make that happen, Mayor, you were asking how to get the downtown real estate market. You've got these big parking lots you were talking about, and one way that we found, we had a 28-acre site near the old Schlitz Brewery that had been a rail yard. We had it available and was sitting there for a long time. We divided it into 6 parcels, and by making it smaller, then we had different developers on each one. We had a fixed price for the land, and if you won a design contest, you got into it. And that really worked. That, from envisioning to the end, took less than 4 years. Over $750 million of investment in that spot. In another case, we had an empty lot downtown, right across the street from the convention center. We had one promise after another from a hotel operator. You give us the land and give us some TIF money. And and my reaction to that was, I said, well, look, I mean, you think we're such a crappy place, we have to bribe you to be here? That's the only way you're going to come? And I just didn't like it. Didn't feel right, and we had tried it. We had tried the subsidy, but then the subsidy always had to be bigger. And I had some guy in the hotel industry tell me, he said, John, you're not going to get one more room than you would otherwise with the subsidy. So why don't we try something else? So Peter Park, our city planner, said, well, let's look at the old plat lines on an empty lot. And there were a bunch of little, little buildings. There were, 18 buildings on the site instead of one. And we didn't go that detailed, but we came in and put 6 lots and then tried to get them off one by one. So we put that out there, and we had some pretty good response to it. We had some medium-sized, small-time people who wanted to come in, put row houses in, and put whatever they wanted. And it started to build up. And sure enough, one of these hotel dudes comes along and says, all right, I'll buy it if you can erase those lines, and I'll come in and buy it. No subsidy, just let me have it. And it'd be nice to tell you that then the hotel popped up, but then the recession hit. This happened after the round. There wouldn't have been a recession if I'd still been there. It did work. This idea, and it's worked other places where you take one of those lots and look at the old map and put the lines back in where the building lots were and try it and see what happens. You might be surprised. Small developers, that school teacher who with his brother, the plumbing contractor, likes to build 4 houses a year, or instead of just doing stuff out in the sticks, they start coming into the city. And we did have that happen. And we ended up with a lot of little small developers doing infill on small lots and infill sites. And these are people that don't come into the city hall with their hands up. So anyway, let me move along so we'll start some kind of question and answers. The most dramatic renewal of a city that I've ever seen in the world is in Seoul, South Korea. At the end of the Korean War, the United States government built this freeway right through the middle of Seoul on top of the river, the Shishong River, right through the middle of Seoul. And it carried 160,000 cars a day. And one of the engineers who had worked on it, he was right out of engineering school working on this project, was named Lee Myung-bak. And even though he had worked on it, he hated it. And when he became mayor, he was elected mayor in 2001, and he had a distinguished career as head of the major construction company in Korea, in South Korea. They don't do construction in North Korea. So anyway, he became mayor, and within 2 years, they torn the freeway out, rebuilt the river again, and a few years after that, it looks like this. And there's only 2 moving lanes at grade on the surface. No freeway. The freeway is not under the street. There is no freeway. They just didn't do it because the street grid is so rich that the traffic disappeared in the street grid. Instead of concentrating the traffic into this big traffic machine in the middle of town, it uses the grid. They did put in another transit line, which helped a little bit. But basically, the traffic disappeared. And people love this place, and they hang out there, including him. Look how happy he is. The mayor, he did the right thing. He had the courage to do the right thing. He ran against the status quo and came up with the right answer. And now he's president, and he's not so happy. Now, I'll just end in just a second here. This is Will Allen, who runs Growing Power in Milwaukee, which he has about 20 acres under production in Milwaukee and about close to 1,000 acres in the outer area, in the farm area, and he basically services farm markets and bodega kind of small stores in the inner city, and some of the bigger stores like Roundy's, which is the big grocery store in Wisconsin. Organic, locally produced produce. And it's all about food distribution. And there's been a lot of talk around the country about turning cities into farms, like Detroit. 140 square miles in Detroit, turn 70 square miles into a farm. That's not going to work because there's 57,000 square miles in Michigan, and most of it is either wilderness or farm. So the idea of pulling all the dead foundations and cadmium and everything else that's underneath the ground in Detroit and turning it into a farm Well, what they can do with their Eastern market and their farm markets and all that, and their food distribution, if they listen to Will and deal with food distribution, not converting the city into a farm, they can really help the health outcomes for the people, and that's what Will did in Milwaukee, and we worked with them in the health department. And then to make even more money, he'd go down and slip down to Chicago every Wednesday to Lincoln Park, which is the richest neighborhood in Chicago, just north of downtown. And he'd sell his produce for outrageous prices, and then take the money back to Milwaukee. But anyway, this guy, really understands urbanism, and he'll be speaking at our meeting, which I had to, promote since that's what I do. I work at CFEDC. June 1 through 4 in Madison, so if any of you are interested in coming, we have a few brochures over there you can pick up on the way out. And we have Will Crow, the guy who wrote Nature's Metropolis, one of the best books ever written about cities. And he's coming. And conservative economist from Harvard, Ed Glazer, who just wrote a book, The Triumph of the Cities, and from a very conservative point of view, talks about how much value cities add to the economy, and how the urban place and the proximity of people and the various forms of commerce, having them all together adds so much value, which is what I want to close on. The unifying theme for Wilmington should be, in my opinion, should be about adding value. Whether you're a Republican or conservative, liberal or Democrat, whether you live in the middle of the city or the edge of the city, what adds the most value? And I can tell you, if you look around the country, the places that have the most value are the ones that are the most urban. And that includes the suburbs surrounding it. The suburbs of San Francisco have a lot higher incomes than the suburbs around Detroit. And you can live in a suburb outside Detroit, like Grosse Pointe Farms or something, and say, we're better than Detroit. We make more money than Detroit. But they don't make that much more money. Really, when you look at what happens in San Francisco. If you have a successful center city, it's good for the outer areas as well. And it's good for the central city to have the outer areas learn urbanism. But you've already started on that with Mayfair. It's a great example of this effort to try to create urbanism. There's a few things that should be done to make it even better than it is, but it really is of that kind of genre of place. That is